Christians, welcome tonight on this Monday evening. I trust so far that your week is getting off to a good start. Yesterday we talked about or did a brief expository sort of a discussion on Isaiah 17 verses 10 and 11. Tonight we're going to get back into the series on Job. We're going to get back to the series on Job, and we're going to be in chapter 6. Now, the interesting thing here is that we've just got through two chapters, where we heard from Eliphaz, the first of Job's friends, and we had 2 chapters of Job, then 2 chapters of Eliphaz, and now we have Job's first response to one of his friends. And so we're going to be in Job chapter 6. Now, Job is going to talk for chapter 6 through chapter 7. And in these chapters, it sort of paints this picture of Job as a suffering saint. And we shouldn't look at it as a portrait of him alone, but we should see it as something that we can apply to ourselves in the event that we find ourselves struggling and going through a variety of sufferings. And what we see here, as Job sort of laments and cries out, he is taking stock in human weaknesses. And we see what many people might consider unfairness in suffering. Unfairness. Now, what do I mean by that? When you deal with people today, believers, everyone has this sense of what they believe or what they would constitute as that which is being fair. There's this idea that God is supposed to be fair. And we look at God through the lens of democracy in America. And we start assessing what would constitute God's fairness. But I have to say something. For those of you who have been on this discussion from the beginning of Job, this exposition, you will know and recognize easily that when you look back at what happened to Job, was something that was going on between God and Satan. And when you look at that whole scenario from the standpoint of the 21st century, let's say American, there was nothing fair about what happened to Job through the lenses of human eyes. What was fair about it? He suffered immensely. He suffered great loss up to and including the loss of his children and the cursing of his wife. Now, the condescension of his friends. What about this, from a human standpoint, is fair? I submit to you, nothing. Nothing was fair about this. Not from the human perspective. I don't want anybody saying that I am questioning the works of God. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm saying is that when it comes to God, fairness does not come into the equation. And if it did, it would not go well for humanity. If God were fair, if God were perfectly fair from the standpoint with which we humans look at fairness, it would not fare well for us if God were fair. It would be disastrous for us. So Job, we're seeing this, what we could construe as unfairness in his suffering. And we also deal with the limitations of human counsel. Job's friends came to give him comfort and counsel. But we see here in the dealings with Job's friends that even human counsel has its limitations. We know that because they have started already with Eliphaz, and it will go on with the other friends, Bildad and Zophar and Elihu, where they simply will fall short in providing Job their counsel. They fall grievously short in their efforts. But Job is one who never abandons. He never abandons the sovereignty of God. That is what he clings to. That is what he holds to. That is what keeps him afloat amidst these troublesome seas that he now finds himself swimming in and all but drowning. Job chapter 6. Job, being in the position of one who is suffering, we find him speaking and addressing his friends and talking as one who still serves in the capacity of a pastor. And he represents the afflicted. He speaks as a pastor representing the afflicted. And when you think about it, ask yourself, who does that sound like? A shepherd, a pastor, who is trying to get the afflicted to hold fast to the faith that they have that brought them to this place. This is what we're dealing with. In all of his affliction, he still manages to maintain the posture of a pastor who represents the afflicted. And in this case, it is him. His friends, they look at the experiences, and in their mind, they validate his experiences as being representative of things which are the result of having a sinful life, and they are wrong. And what we're about to see now is Job embarking on giving himself or expressing himself as one who is in despair, but in despair for nothing of his own that can be pointed to as fault. Job was faultless. And he shows us that faith does not require this sort of suppression of grief. Job is showing us that it is okay to express grief. There's nothing wrong with expressing grief. And Job shows us that. And right now, we're going to see this very substantial and rich potpourri of God's sovereignty. The theological understanding that Job has that his friends don't have. Job knows how to apply these theological themes and doctrines to the heart of the afflicted. He is talking about and talking to his friends and pleading with them to express themselves to him in a way that is consistent with godliness. The afflicted is the one teaching those who are whole, so to speak. And so Job sits in this dual place, being the one of the afflicted and as the one who is providing counsel for the afflicted. And Job finds himself confronted with friends that are yet and never do take part with what is required to show compassion to another brother who is suffering as greatly as Job was suffering. This is what is going on. And Job is laying his heart, he's pouring his heart out. And no doubt God sees this. No doubt he sees this. He's a very candid individual. He's speaking straight from the heart, and he's telling it like it is coming from his heart. And he knows that God is holy. He doesn't question that. He never has. He knows that God is holy. He knows that God is just. He knows that God is a righteous judge. Job just doesn't understand why what's happening to him is happening to him, because he can't point to anything and see where he has fallen or come short of what was expected of him to be and to do in the presence of God, being God's faithful servant. And we know that Job was right in this because God said so. He said that Job was his servant. He told Satan this. Job is my servant. Have you considered my servant Job? Have you done that? We're going to see here in these verses that Job he's desperate for a better situation, and he sees no way to get there. He sees no way to improve his position unless it be by death itself. How downcast must you be? How tremendous must the burden of despair be if you feel that the only way to find your pain to be alleviated is by death itself? This was a man who had everything. This was a man who had everything. So he recognizes that having had everything and having had all those things taken away, he's got to be thinking, well, if I want this situation to go away, what is there left for me to look forward to? I had all the stuff before. Obviously, that is not going to be where I find support and strength. That's not where it's going to be. If God used those instruments to be the support for my comfort, then why would he have taken it? Job understood, as he told his wife, if I must take the evil with the bad, the chaos with the order. And so Job knows that it's not the stuff that is going to make him better. This is where you see the holiness of this man. Think about it. He sees death as being a better solution than restoration of what he had. You know what that says? It says that he knows that stuff did nothing for the quality of life that men ought to be seeking for. This is what Job understood. Think about it. There is no situation where he thought, oh, let me get my stuff back. He didn't go to that. He's asking for death. Because now he knows that even the stuff, and he knew this all along, that it could do nothing for him. This is a lesson that we, brethren, should learn. Stuff and the circumstances of life, these things do not give us anything that provides true and genuine comfort. They just don't. And Job knew this. He knew this. And Job. So now we see Job about to speak. He's about to speak, and he's about to contend with his friend by a defense of himself. And his reply is going to reveal. His replies are going to reveal and to expose how far short his friends come of adequately and truthfully addressing him. Job sat here so far listening to Eliphaz pronounce his platitudes, showing that compassion can only follow judgment, rather than to precede it. And this is where we, as faithful servants to the Most High first, and in particular, focusing on Him when we're dealing with brothers and sisters who are suffering and are undergoing the weight of affliction and the burdens of whatever is going on in their life. We start with compassion. We start with compassion. And if judgment comes, it comes. But what we don't do is start with judgment. And this is what the problem is. And listen, here's what we need to understand about compassion. Because these words that we use in the Bible, they're not used loosely. There's a reason why. There's a reason why. And so when you look at compassion, we have to ask ourselves, what is the presupposition that warrants compassion? This is a good question for me to ask the panel. We have an illustrious group here. Let me ask. I'll go around one by one. What does compassion presuppose? Why is compassion distinct from, let's say, mercy or grace or whatever? What is compassion? What is it? What warrants compassion, and what does compassion presuppose about the person who ought to be its recipient? Sister Linda, what do you think?
I think that it supposes that the person that you offered compassion for is a good person, a genuine person, someone that is deserving of compassion.
Okay, a good person. All right. Brother Stubbs, what do you think, brother?
That's a good question. Let's see. I guess compassion kind of has to do with like sympathy or pity.
Yeah.
Like it's like a concern of someone that's like suffering. So like when I think about the two men that were walking down the street and they saw somebody beat up and they looked at him and passed by, the other one went by the other side, but the Samaritan had compassion on him
Yep.
and healed up his wounds and got him a hotel, etc. So I think that compassion, it kind of makes you, it kind of puts you in the place of the person that you're having compassion on, and you kind of have a tendency to treat them how you would want to be treated, in my opinion.
Amen, brother. Amen. Brother Canaan, what do you think? What does compassion presuppose? What warrants compassion?
Well, I was going to actually go to a verse to kind of encompass the idea of it as far as what we see in Scripture, right? Luke 10:33 to 37. But a Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion and came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. And he put him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and whatever more you will spend when I return, I will repay you." Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? And he said, "The one who showed compassion to him." Then Jesus said to him, "Go and do the same." And so I would say that that's one core component that we have for compassion. But obviously meditating and reflecting on these this example that Jesus gives us as far as a good Samaritan is important, because that's not the only principle and example that we have, but it is a good one to reflect on in our day-to-day life, because this is how we are to demonstrate compassion for others, but also to have discernment when we do that.
Amen. Sister Mariah, what are your thoughts? What does compassion presuppose concerning the person needing it?
Well, when I'm thinking of compassion, I'm thinking that, there's a love there. You have like this tenderheartedness towards the individual that's in need of this compassion.
Okay. All right. You wanna add some more weight to that?
No.
That's okay. That's all right. That's quite all right. Sister May, what warrants compassion and what does compassion presuppose?
I think that compassion, the reason that we're able to identify with compassion, I think it starts from the heart of the person. I think the heart reveals the one who's giving the compassion, but the one who needs compassion is also it's their heart that needs it at the moment. So
Okay.
I would also think I think just like that, compassion necessitates a need, just like grace necessitates a need.
Okay.
I guess
All
I'm
right.
gonna understanding like when you're saying like what does it presuppose about the other person?
That's all right. Your answer is fine. I don't want you to try to think about what I'm thinking about. I want to get what you're thinking about.
Oh, I
And I,
didn't know when you said presuppose. That's all I was trying
yeah,
to.
yeah. No. So what I mean is, what I'm getting at is this: there are grounds, there are situations where compassion is necessary, and there are other situations where compassion might not be. And this is what I'm getting at. And I want to deal with where compassion won't be once I get through around the group. So I want to get through everybody first, and then we'll talk about that for a little bit. Sister Candy, what does compassion presuppose on a person who needs it?
When I think about his friends and what it's love, because compassion comes from the source of love, period. And for them to love him and have compassion, it's like they're not even considering.
Are you breaking up, sister? Your phone is pretty bad. It's pretty bad where you are. It's pretty bad where you are. All right. Brother Jeff, man of God, what do you think?
Well, I think the basic for me is that compassion presupposes that the person you're having compassion on has a need.
Yes.
They have a need. They have a need for love. They have a need for health. They have a need for food. They have a need for shelter. And when you provide that, you're compassionate.
Right.
So that's
absolutely. They have a need. All right. Brother Jeff, encouraging servant, who gave me this wonderful hat today. I just came in the mail. Be provoked, be persuaded. Go
Well,
ahead, brother.
Jonathan, I think compassion, excuse me, also has a very strong relationship with empathy. In other words, us being able to put ourselves into the place of the other person that is needing compassion and trying to see what they're going through from their point of view so that we can be, or I should say, respond in a compassionate, loving way to them. Being compassionate oftentimes means extending grace, maybe to someone, Jonathan, that we feel doesn't necessarily deserve it.
Right.
You know, a lot of times we're asked to be compassionate to people who have hurt or injured us. Jesus has made that clear.
Right.
So we have to look at those things apart from how we feel and be willing to extend that compassion, be willing to put ourselves in their place, see how they are reacting, how they feel, and then extend compassion accordingly.
Right.
That's my thinking.
Right. See, I think that, you know, as a collective, I think we sort of got there. And so, you know, like Linda talked about a good person. But on that part, I want to add this. And that is that showing compassion is treating someone as a good person, even if they are not. Even if they're not. That is how we treat them. And somebody brought up the Good Samaritan. And this is also going along those lines. There wasn't any question about, hey, how did you get here? Hey, how did this happen? What did you do? That wasn't what the question was. The question was, this man is lying in the street, and the person who recognizes him while other people just pass by, the compassionate person, the Good Samaritan, looked at this person and says, he needs help. And so this is important. One of the things that came up several times was need. This came up 3 times. Need. And so it is very often that the person who is a recipient of compassion is a person who is in need. Generally, a person who needs compassion is someone who is being buried under the weight of affliction. You very rarely find that a wealthy or a prosperous or a powerful person is in need of compassion. It is very rare. I'm not saying it's impossible, but what I'm saying is rare. So when you look at those who need compassion or those who warrant compassion, usually these are the kind of people that others look upon with judgment. With judgment. That person should get a job. That person should pull up their bootstraps. That person should do this. That person, there's no reason why in America this person should be suffering like this. There's no reason. This is what is not compassionate. Compassion means that regardless of the person who is in a situation, you don't look at what could be looked at as something worthy of judgment from the way the world sees it. You recognize the immediate need in this moment and address that with compassion, meaning to treat them as if they were just as good or equal to you. Like somebody said, treat them the way you would want to be treated if you were in that situation. But we live in a time where so many people, all they do is condescend, looking on the outward man or the outward person and making a judgment. And then hopefully compassion will come later. And what is happening here with Job's friends, they start with judgment. Not compassion. They start with judgment. And they go in on him and they double down and tell him, you're in this situation. They're reminding him in their minds of why he got there. They're wrong about why he got there, but they made up their mind that that's why he's there, because he didn't pull up his bootstraps spiritually. He didn't do what he was supposed to do. He's sinning and he's hiding it. He's covering it up. He's guilty of something. That's why you're in a situation, Job. And if you listen to what I say, because me and my buddies here, we searched it out. So just listen to us and we'll tell you what you need to do. But they don't show him anything, any kind of compassion whatsoever. Any kind. It is very difficult to show compassion because the depravity of the human man, we look at the outward things and we make a judgment. And the judgment goes before compassion rather than the other way around. And this is what Job is going to begin to plead with his friends. Compassion, as a matter of tradition, if you will, is not required except for the afflicted. The afflicted ones are the ones who are in need of compassion. Generally speaking, it is not the prosperous, it's not the wealthy, it's not the powerful who are in need of compassion. Compassion is for those whose circumstances could seem to warrant from the outside to warrant judgment. And you may look at that person and go, yeah, something is wrong here that doesn't pass the smell test. However, you know, a compassionate person looks past that to deal with the affliction first and deal with judgment later. Let's deal with that later. Let's now get you on the right path. Let's bring you comfort. That's what compassion is supposed to do. Compassion is something that should precede judgment. And this is the point that I want to try to bring home here. Brother Canaan, go ahead. Sure.
When we go back to Job 2:12-13, when they looked from a distance and did not recognize him,
Yeah.
they raised their voices and wept And each of them tore his robe, and they threw dust over their heads toward the sky. Then they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, with no one speaking a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great. Now, would you say that that is a example of compassion from them, even though they failed to recognize the?
Yeah, I would. I think that was their intention. I believe that was their intention. I think that many of us as believers have that intention when we see somebody struggling. See, I'm not saying they don't have flashes. I mean, they when Job was in trouble and they heard about it, these three men got together. They set an appointed time to go meet with Job. They came with the intention of mourning and comforting him. And they sat down with him for 7 days and they said nothing. Then Job speaks, and this is when everything starts to happen after that. So, yeah.
Okay. And then second, I think this is not necessarily regarding them, but I would say that this is also accompanying a part of compassion that I don't see a lot of personally, and I hope to see more as I walk with the Lord and with other brothers and sisters. But when we talk about sharing both in joy and in sorrow,
Right.
To really understand and be better at that. I can't say that I'm good at it. When someone's going through particular trials or severe situation or hardship, but sharing with someone in that, maybe it does require us just to sit down with them and be there and present, even if we can't necessarily offer anything, for that moment, kind of like how they did here. I don't know if you guys have any experiences that you'd share regarding that.
Well, I'll tell you this, brother Canaan. I know one thing. If I'm laying down in the gutter somewhere, I hope you're the one that walks by. Because one thing I can tell about you is that you definitely have a compassionate heart. That's what my perception is about you, and it comes through in so many ways in terms of what you say and what you sort of convey to the rest of us. And the world needs more of that. The world needs more of that. It really is true. And I'm not saying that just to puff you up in any kind of way. I really do mean that. And it's so funny because everybody here who are regulars anyway, there's characteristics that you can see that when you contribute to the whole, where the benefits really, come from. And so, like you said, you're looking at this thing, and I noticed in the last couple of nights that we're on here, you have a tendency to look for the good even in these guys. And you're right in doing so. Because they did have the disposition and the apparent outward display of what we might look at compassionate bearing. And they started out that way for sure. But being the fragile sinners that we are, sometimes it can be a little difficult for us to stay on point with what we need to be in our service. And so I do believe these guys came with honest intentions, with good intentions. I really believe that. But I do believe also that they fell short of it. And we know that they did because Job is the first one to point it out. And God has already established clearly what his position is and his perspective is on Job. And we're going to start to see that. So I agree. I agree with you on that one. Sister Meg.
Yeah, I heard a quote once, and it says, you can tell the character of a man or anybody, man, period. Mm-hmm. You can tell the character of a man by how he treats someone who can do nothing for them.
That's exactly right. Yep.
You know what I mean? And so yes. I think that in compassion, so many people say, oh, well, if you're wealthy or if you have all these nice things, then one doesn't warrant compassion. But we notice that in scripture that Jesus takes everything internally.
Right.
So when we think about having compassion for other people, could you imagine just like having all the money in the world and every single thing that you want, but you are without Christ?
Right.
And if you are without Christ, you can have everything on the outside. But to me, I feel that you need compassion,
Right.
because I feel bad for them more so than I would for anybody else, because, and I think that those types of things warrant compassion. But when it comes to Job, it's like, when I just don't, it's hard for me to see that the intent, like you stated, it was very good in the beginning. So where was it that veered when you saw your friend there? Like, what made somebody who's sitting in turmoil turn around with your wonderful theology and then judge him or say, God, you did this. This is why this is happening. You were being this way. This is why this happened. And I don't know, that it just boggles my mind.
Yeah, grief and suffering and sorrow